I remember the moment she walked into my courtroom, not with the quiet apprehension I have come to expect from those facing judgment, not with humility, not even with the cautious composure of someone aware that their future hangs in the balance, but with a laugh, a soft, careless laugh that echoed in the marble chamber like an insult carved into stone. From my bench, elevated, steady, and unmoving, I watched her every step. Designer heels clicking in arrogant rhythm, each strike against the polished floor, announcing not fear but entitlement. Her posture was relaxed, almost bored, as if she were attending a social event rather than a criminal proceeding. Her eyes wandered, not searching for mercy, but scanning the room like she owned it. I have seen many defendants, frightened, broken, defiant, but this one walked in as if justice itself were beneath her. Her attire spoke louder than any introduction ever could. A tailored outfit worth more than most people in that courtroom earned in months, jewelry catching the light with calculated precision, each sparkle screaming privilege. Her hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place, her expression polished into a smirk that never quite left her lips. And when her gaze finally met mine, she didn't lower her eyes. She didn't show respect. She tilted her head and smiled, not politely, not nervously. No, she smiled like she had already decided the outcome. I felt it then, that slow, controlled rise of something deep within me, not anger, not yet, but recognition. I have presided over countless cases, but arrogance like hers, it always carries a cost. The murmurs in the courtroom began to ripple, subtle at first, then growing as people noticed her demeanor. Even the bailiff stiffened slightly, sensing the imbalance in the room. I let the silence stretch, deliberately, letting her laughter fade into discomfort. I opened the case file slowly, my fingers tracing the edge of the paper, not because I needed to, but because I wanted her to feel the weight of time, the gravity of patience. She shifted slightly, impatient already, tapping her manicured nails against the table. That sound, sharp, rhythmic, disrespectful. I looked up again, our eyes locked. And in that moment, without saying a word, I made a decision. This would not be rushed. This would not be easy. This would be a lesson. As the proceedings began, the charges were read aloud, and even then, she smiled. Reckless endangerment, property destruction, assault. The words carried weight, but to her they seemed like trivial inconveniences. I listened carefully, observing every flicker of expression, every shift in posture. Her lawyer leaned in repeatedly, whispering urgently, trying to contain her. But she waved him off with subtle irritation. That alone told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just arrogance, it was belief. A belief that consequences did not apply to her, that wealth, status, and name were shields stronger than any law. I have seen that belief before, and I have dismantled it before. The story began to unfold, slowly, piece by piece. A late-night incident, a luxury car, speed far beyond legal limits, witnesses describing chaos, panic, destruction left in her wake. I listened, not just to the facts, but to the spaces between them, the hesitation in voices, the fear that still lingered. And as the prosecution spoke, detailing the events with clinical precision, I noticed something chilling. She wasn't listening. Not really. She leaned back, occasionally whispering something to her lawyer, occasionally glancing around the room, as if bored, as if this were beneath her attention that, more than anything, began to ignite something deeper within me. When the first witness took the stand, the room shifted. A man, older, his hands trembling slightly as he took the oath. His voice was steady at first, but I could see the strain behind it. He described the moment, the sound of the engine, the sudden impact, the fear, and as he spoke, I watched her. I watched for any sign, any flicker of humanity, but there was nothing. She rolled her eyes at one point, actually rolled her eyes, and let out a quiet, dismissive sigh. Her lawyer immediately leaned in again, whispering urgently, but she simply smirked. That was the moment I felt it clearly. Not anger, not yet, but certainty. This was not ignorance. This was choice. The evidence continued to build, each detail painting a clearer picture: surveillance footage, witness statements, damage reports. And through it all, her attitude remained unchanged. At one point, she even let out a soft laugh, barely audible, but enough. Enough for the entire courtroom to feel it, enough for the victim's family, seated just a few rows back, to visibly flinch. I saw it. I saw everything: the tightening of fists, the quiet tears, the silent suffering. And I also saw her, untouched by any of it. That contrast, that unbearable imbalance, it settled heavily in my chest. Her lawyer attempted to present a defense, carefully structured, strategically worded, but even he struggled to maintain control over her. She interrupted him twice, correcting him, dismissing parts of his argument, even joking under her breath. I let it happen, for a moment, just long enough for the courtroom to feel the tension stretch to its breaking point. Then I spoke, calmly, firmly. Her name echoed in the room, and for the first time, she paused, only for a second, but it was enough. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze unwavering, and I made it clear this was not a place for games. As more witnesses came forward, the pattern became undeniable: damage, fear, trauma, not just physical, but emotional, psychological, lasting. And yet, she remained detached. Her body language screamed indifference, her posture relaxed, her expression amused. I have seen denial before. I have seen shock, disbelief, even anger. But this was something else. This was entitlement so deeply ingrained that reality itself struggled to penetrate it. And I knew. As I sat there, listening, observing, this case was no longer just about the charges. It was about something far more fundamental. Then came the victim. The room changed instantly. The air grew heavier, quieter, almost fragile. She walked slowly to the stand, each step carrying weight that no one in that room could ignore. Her hands trembled as she took the oath, her voice barely above a whisper at first. And as she began to speak, I felt it, that shift, that undeniable pull of truth. She described her life before, her routine, her work, her dreams, simple things, ordinary things, the kind that most people take for granted. And then she described the night everything changed. Her voice cracked, broke, rebuilt itself with effort that was almost painful to witness. She spoke of the impact, the fear, the confusion, the pain. But more than that, she spoke of what came after: the hospital visits, the financial strain, the sleepless nights, the anxiety that never quite left, the life that no longer felt like her own. And as she spoke, I watched the defendant. I watched closely, hoping, perhaps, for even the smallest sign of recognition. But there was nothing. Just that same faint smile, that same distant gaze. It was infuriating. I felt it then, the strain of restraint, the weight of responsibility pressing against something deeply human within me. As a judge, I am bound by law, by procedure, by fairness, but I am also human. And in that moment, listening to that pain, watching that indifference, it became harder than usual to maintain that balance. My hands rested firmly on the bench, my posture unchanged, but inside there was movement, controlled, measured, building. The victim continued, her words growing stronger, steadier, not because the pain lessened, but because she refused to let it silence her. She spoke of resilience, of trying to rebuild, of fighting to regain some sense of normalcy. And as she did, I saw something remarkable: strength, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. And it stood in stark contrast to the hollow confidence of the defendant, one built through struggle, the other through unchecked privilege. That contrast, it mattered. When the testimony ended, the silence that followed was profound. No movement, no whispers, just the weight of everything that had been said, hanging in the air. I took a moment, just a moment, before proceeding, not because I needed time, but because the room did. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than any words ever could, and in that silence, I made my decision. As sentencing approached, I felt the shift within myself reach its peak. This was the moment, the point where observation ends and judgment begins. I looked directly at her, no longer just observing, but addressing. My voice was calm, controlled, but firm in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. I spoke of responsibility, of accountability, of the law, but more than that, I spoke of character, of the choices that define us, not in moments of comfort, but in moments of consequence. She tried to interrupt. She actually tried to interrupt. A soft laugh, a dismissive comment, but I stopped her immediately. My voice rose, not in anger, but in authority, clear, final, undeniable. The courtroom froze, and for the first time, truly, she looked uncertain, just a flicker, but it was there. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze locked onto hers, and I made it clear. This was no longer her stage. I spoke at length about the damage, the suffering, the blatant disregard for human life, but also about her behavior, her attitude, her complete lack of remorse. I did not rush. I did not soften. Every word was deliberate, measured, designed to pierce through the illusion she had built around herself. And as I spoke, I watched that illusion begin to crack. When I finally announced the sentence, the maximum allowed, the reaction was immediate. Shock, pure, unfiltered shock. Her expression collapsed, her posture shifted, her composure shattered. She spoke quickly, desperately, trying to reverse what had already been decided. But it was too late. That moment had passed. The bailiff stepped forward, calm, professional, unyielding, and as they took her into custody, the transformation was complete, the arrogance gone, replaced by fear, real fear. She begged, pleaded, her voice breaking in ways it never had before. But justice does not bend to desperation. Months later, I reflected on the case. From my bench, from my position, I see patterns. I see consequences unfold in ways most never do. And in this case, the outcome was clear. The victim slowly rebuilding, stronger, wiser, and the defendant facing a reality she could no longer escape. In the end, the lesson was simple. Wealth may buy comfort. Influence may delay consequence. But character is what determines how you stand when everything else falls away. And in my courtroom, arrogance is not just exposed, it is punished. Because justice does not care who you are, only what you have done. I remember the exact sound her voice made when the reality finally began to settle in. It was no longer sharp, no longer dripping with sarcasm or coated in arrogance. It trembled, uneven, fragile, almost unrecognizable. From my bench, I watched her fingers tighten around the edge of the table as if she could physically hold herself together, as if the courtroom itself had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. Moments ago, she had laughed in a place where lives are weighed and measured. And now she was staring at the consequences of that laughter as if they were something foreign, something impossible. I have seen this transformation before, that slow, painful collapse of certainty, when entitlement meets reality, and reality refuses to yield. The bailiff's hand rested firmly, professionally on her arm. Not aggressive, not forceful, but final. That kind of touch carries a message that words cannot soften. She resisted, just slightly at first, a hesitation more than a struggle, as if her mind had not yet caught up with what her body was being told. Her lawyer spoke quickly, urgently, his voice low, almost desperate, trying to salvage something, anything. But even he knew. I could see it in the way his shoulders dropped, in the way his eyes avoided hers for just a second too long. There are moments in a courtroom where the outcome is no longer a question, only a reality waiting to be accepted. And this was one of those moments. Her father arrived too late. That in itself was something I would not forget. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened abruptly, the heavy wood echoing against the walls as a man of undeniable presence stepped in. Tailored suit, controlled urgency, power in every movement. I recognized him immediately, not personally, but by reputation. The kind of man who is used to solving problems with a phone call. The kind of man who believes influence can bend any situation. His eyes scanned the room quickly, landing on his daughter. And in that instant, I saw something rare. Not arrogance, not control, but fear. Real fear. "I'll handle this," he said, his voice low but commanding as he moved forward, already reaching for his phone, already preparing to do what had likely worked for him his entire life. I let him speak for a moment, just long enough for the courtroom to feel the tension shift again, just long enough for him to believe, even briefly, that this was still within his control. Then I spoke, calm, firm, final. I reminded him where he was. I reminded him that this was not a boardroom, not a negotiation, but a court of law. And for the first time, truly, he stopped. His daughter turned toward him then, her composure completely gone, her voice breaking as she called out to him, not with confidence, but with desperation. "Dad, do something," she said, the words barely holding together, her earlier laughter now replaced by something raw, something exposed. He looked at her, and for a brief moment, he didn't speak. That silence, that hesitation, it said more than anything he could have said out loud, because even a man like him, understood what she was only just beginning to realize. Some things cannot be undone. The bailiff began to guide her toward the exit, slowly, deliberately, giving her just enough time to feel every step, every inch of distance between who she thought she was and who she had become in that moment. She stumbled once, not dramatically, but enough to reveal the shift, the loss of control, the unraveling of certainty. Her heels, once confident and precise, now echoed differently, uneven, uncertain. And as she passed the rows of spectators, I watched the reactions, some silent, some somber, some quietly satisfied. Justice, when it is visible, carries weight. Her father tried once more, stepping forward, his voice tighter now, less controlled, asking for reconsideration, for leniency, for anything that might soften the outcome. But I had already spoken, and in my courtroom, when a decision is made, it is not undone by pressure, by status, or by wealth. I met his gaze directly, not with hostility, but with clarity. This was not personal. This was not emotional. This was justice, and justice does not negotiate. As the doors closed behind her, the sound echoed longer than usual, or perhaps it only felt that way. The courtroom remained still for a moment, no one speaking, no one moving, as if everyone present needed time to process what they had just witnessed. I allowed that silence, respected it, because moments like this, they matter. They remind people that actions have consequences, that behavior has weight, that arrogance, unchecked, leads somewhere very real. In the weeks that followed, I would occasionally think back to that day, not because it was unusual in its outcome, but because of what it revealed. Cases come and go, facts are presented, decisions are made, but sometimes a case exposes something deeper, a pattern, a mindset, a belief system that exists beyond the individual. And in this case, it was the dangerous illusion that accountability can be avoided, that consequences are optional, that respect is unnecessary. That illusion was shattered in my courtroom. Months later, I received an update, not formally, but through the quiet channels that exist within the system. The victim had begun to rebuild, slowly, carefully, each step forward earned through effort and resilience. There were still challenges, still scars, but there was progress, real progress. And that, more than anything, reinforced what I have always known. Strength is not defined by what you have, but by what you endure and how you rise after being broken. As for the defendant, her world had changed in ways she never imagined. The comfort, the control, the certainty, all replaced by structure, by limitation, by consequence. I do not take pleasure in that. That is not my role. But I do recognize its necessity, because justice is not about punishment alone. It is about balance. It is about restoring what can be restored and acknowledging what cannot. And as I sat on my bench once again, presiding over yet another case, I found myself reflecting not on her fall, but on the lesson it carried. In this courtroom, titles mean nothing. Wealth means nothing. Power means nothing. The only thing that matters is the truth and the choices that brought you here. Because in the end, the law does not see your status, it sees your actions, and it answers them accordingly. Because the moment you believe you are above the law is the moment the law reminds you you are not. I remember how, even after the courtroom had emptied and the echoes of that day had settled into silence, her presence still lingered in my mind. Not as a person, but as a pattern I had seen too many times before. From my bench, I have witnessed countless lives intersect with consequence, but there are certain cases, certain individuals, that leave behind more than just a ruling. They leave behind a question about upbringing, about unchecked privilege, about the quiet, dangerous ways arrogance is nurtured when it is never challenged. I sat there for a long moment after adjournment, my hands resting still, my gaze fixed on nothing in particular, and I thought about the first moment she laughed. That laugh. It wasn't just disrespect, it was certainty. The kind of certainty that only exists when someone has never been told no in a way that truly mattered. In the weeks that followed, reports continued to reach my desk, not detailed narratives, not anything dramatic, just small, factual updates that painted a larger picture when placed together. I read them slowly, deliberately, allowing each line to settle before moving to the next. Behavioral notes, adjustment difficulties, moments of resistance, followed by moments of silence. That caught my attention. Silence, because for someone like her, silence is not natural. Silence means reflection. And reflection, whether forced or chosen, is where change begins. I have seen it before. Individuals who enter the system filled with defiance, only to be confronted with something they cannot overpower, themselves. Her father, I was told, had made multiple attempts to intervene, not directly with the court, not foolishly enough to challenge the ruling outright, but through every other channel available to a man of influence. Requests, appeals, strategic pressure placed in places where pressure often works. But this time it didn't. And I knew, without needing confirmation, that this was perhaps the first time in his life that his reach had limits he could not cross. I often wonder, not about his wealth, not about his power, but about his role. Because entitlement like hers, it is rarely self-made. It is taught, reinforced, protected, until one day it collides with something that refuses to bend. There was one particular report, brief, almost insignificant at first glance, but it stayed with me. It mentioned an interaction, no details, no dramatics, just a note that during a routine exchange, she had lowered her gaze when spoken to and responded without defiance. That was it. A small thing, something most people would overlook. But from where I sit, from what I have seen, that moment spoke volumes. Not because it proved she had changed. No, change is far more complex than a single action, but because it suggested something had shifted, the armor had cracked, even if only slightly. And as I reflect on that case now, with time creating distance but not diminishing its weight, I return to the same understanding that has guided me throughout my years on the bench. Justice is not merely about the sentence. It is about the impact. It is about the moment when illusion gives way to truth, when arrogance is stripped down to vulnerability, when a person is forced to confront who they are without the protection of status or wealth. Some rise from that moment, changed, aware, accountable. Others resist it, cling to what they were, and suffer for it. But either way, the law does its part, because in the end, it is not the courtroom that defines you. It is how you walk out of it, or in her case, how you are taken from it, and what you choose to become when there is no one left to shield you from yourself. Because true justice doesn't just punish what you did, it reveals who you really are.